Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing Revolutionaries. The topic for this Revolutionaries, Jim Johnston. Now you may be familiar with his name, you may have heard his name in passing. A lot of times nowadays you hear the call for him to come back, especially when a new theme song is put out and it is terrible. And that's the reason why I wanted to talk about Jim Johnston as a revolutionary. If you're not familiar with the name, Jim Johnston is a composer. He's composed over 1,000 songs. Most of the songs that he's composed were used as WWF/WWE theme music. For almost 30 years, he worked with the company, making some of the most iconic music that's ever been out there in wrestling. So we're going to talk about him, and that's what makes him revolutionary. Now, in the era before Jim Johnston, when theme music was first starting to be big, starting in the 70s and into the early 80s, a lot of the stuff was not original. It was licensed music, music that if you really wanted to use, which a lot of companies found ways around that, you'd have to pay a licensing fee. So someone like the Freebirds coming out to Freebird by Leonard Skinner, or Junkyard Dog coming out to Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, or Hulk Hogan coming out to Eye of the Tiger. While it was awesome and while it made him and set the vibe for that, it also would have cost a ton of money. And at the time, wrestling companies either, like I said, found a way around it, just ignored the fact altogether. I know in an interview I watched with Paul Heyman, and take it with a grain of salt because Paul Heyman is Paul Heyman. Love the man, but a notary wouldn't notarize anything he's ever said. He had mentioned that how ECW got away with it is the loophole is if the music is playing as an ambient sound in the background, in other words, not fed through the soundboard, playing in the arena where they're recording, then you could get away with it. Well, that works, and it works for the presentation of ECW, but for a company like WWF in the 80s, which was trying to put out this high-polished, slick sports entertainment production, that wasn't going to work. And as much as we love certain theme songs that were songs you would actually hear on the radio, the powers that be, namely Vince McMahon, realized that it was going to be quite expensive for him to pay bands like Queen, bands like Survivor, bands like Leonard Skinner to keep using those theme songs. So what he did was he brought the music in-house, initially with a lot of help from Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart made a lot of the old school theme songs, either in collaboration with musicians like Rick Derringer or all by himself, or sometimes he would farm them out. During the Jimmy Hart run, they also brought in Jim Johnston. And Jim Johnston, he brought his own style with him. And that's, in my opinion, there are some great Jimmy Hart themes, Real American to be one of them, Demolition, Honky Tonk Man, all fantastic. And I think Demolition is Rick Derringer, but I might be wrong. It might be him and Jimmy, but I digress. When we get to Jim Johnston, he's mostly known for the New Generation era, the Attitude Era, and beyond. When you think of some of the stalwarts of the company, some of the people of the time, whether it's the gongs with The Undertaker, the Rage Against the Machine stylings of the DX theme, the glass breaking, heralding Stone Cold coming out, or a newer song where Randy Orton hears voices in his head. Even classics like Bret the Hitman Hart's instrumental were all either partially made or fully made by Jim Johnston. He was the guy that was setting the tone. He was to the WWE and WWF what John Williams is to Star Wars. If you think of Star Wars and you think of the beautiful music that makes the movies what they are, that's what Jim Johnston does for wrestlers. I mean, think of the guys I just named. That's some of the top of the crop. The Undertaker, D-Generation X, Steve Austin, Randy Orton, Bret the Hitman Hart, Kane, Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, John Cena, The Ultimate Warrior, The Big Show. The Big Show's theme. I mean, and you can listen to the versatility and just the differences between those songs. He would fit a song perfectly with the wrestler that it was for. And very rarely, I don't think there's one of his theme songs that I would consider bad. There are some that I don't like as much as others, but the ones that I don't like perfectly fit the character that they're for. And it's just one of those things that the synchronicity of him being there at the time that he was, in the era that he was, and was able to give us basically the soundtrack of the Attitude Era. When WCW had Jimmy Hart, which he was still cranking out great stuff, most of the time he was doing rip-offs of songs you heard on the radio. DEP had a semi-version of Smells Like Teen Spirit. Raven had a a knockoff Come As You Are or Even Flow. I forget which one he had. It was either Even Flow or Come As You Are. I always mix the two up. Jericho had the knockoff of Even Flow. I mean, there were so many knockoff sound-alike themes. Even the Wolfpack theme was kind of a ripoff of a song named Burn by Militia, which if you've never heard that, go back and listen to that. That's actually the theme song that the Wolfpack wanted to use, but they couldn't license, so they got C Murder to do the Wolfpack theme, which I actually think the Wolfpack theme is better than the Militia song. But anyway, I digress. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Jim Johnston and the WWE. I mean, would the walk to the ring by The Undertaker be as special as it was if you didn't hear that ominous music? Would we know an ass whooping was coming if that glass didn't break and Stone Cold didn't stomp his way out to the ring? Would we know that we're about to crotch chop and get the crowd to show us our boobs and talk about ass and stupid, silly stuff if we didn't hear the Break It Down? I mean, these are some of the classic theme songs that goes with the classic wrestlers of all time. And when you think and you look at now and you look at this generation of songs and you compare it, either the era of the CFOs, which were hit and miss, they were about 50-50, and Def Rebel, who is pretty much all miss, about 1 out of every 10 they make is good. In 10 years, are we going to remember Roman Reigns' theme from now? Are we going to remember LA Knight's theme 10 years from now? No, but if in 10 years, I guarantee you, if we hit the Bret Hart theme music, you'll still know what it is. And that's what made him such a revolutionary. He was a perfect guy, the perfect fit for a role that really didn't exist before him, before Jimmy Hart, which Jimmy Hart gets a lot of credit to. Don't get me wrong, this isn't Jim Johnston on his own. I just think he deserves a light shined on him, especially in the era that we live now, where all of the music is generic and terrible. Jim Johnston deserves to be looked at. He deserves to be in the WWE Hall of Fame. And I've actually heard him say he'd be willing to come back and make music for them, and I'd love to see that happen. For all those reasons, for all of his contributions, that's why I think Jim Johnston is a revolutionary in pro wrestling. That's why I think he deserved to be talked about. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Heel Heat.